I'm really looking forward to this next conversation. I am pleased to welcome to KOA Jim Campbell. He is a nationally syndicated radio show host. He does a show on business. He does a show on forensics, and he's the author of Madoff Talks, uncovering the untold story behind the most notorious Ponzi scheme in history. This is a story that's been getting even more attention lately because of the Netflix documentary that my wife has been watching. I haven't watched it very much. My wife's been watching it a lot and says it's great. And part of the reason that I haven't been watching it very much is that my professional background is in financial markets, and I know a lot of this story already, but not a lot of the details we're going to get into with Jim right now. Jim Campbell, welcome to KOA.
Hey, Ross. It's my honor to be here with you, and thank your wife for watching. I appreciate it, and I hope you get through the whole thing. It was number 2 last week in U.S. Today for U.S. TV series, so that's pretty cool. And by the way, the untold story in this case is really out there. There's a lot of people who think they know the whole thing, but I think if they watch, they'll see there's a lot they don't know, or if they read the book, which I'd appreciate as well as McGraw-Hill would appreciate.
Yeah, and I'm going to. My wife is a very, very tough critic, and often she will watch some series on TV and not recommend it to me. She keeps recommending your Madoff series to me, and I will watch it. And I want, I used to be from, let's see, 1987 until 2001-ish. I was on the trading floor in Chicago waving my hands and yelling, and from time to time, we would make trades with Madoff. Especially on the stock side, not so much on the option side. And I'm well aware of them. I never met Bernie Madoff. He was in New York. I was in Chicago. But this whole story was all over the place. And I think what you've done with this book is so interesting. So tell us a little bit about which members of the Madoff family you were able to talk to and how you arranged to talk to them.
Okay. Let me say first, Ross, the point you just made is really profound because Madoff's strategy was options-based. As you just said, you never came across him in the options market in Chicago, and he was trading options to the extent sometimes of 150 times the entire options market. And the fact that nobody saw him in his footprints trading there was rather a huge red flag.
Right. And one quick interjection. So he was not, sure. I think he was not a direct clearing member in the Options Clearing Corporation. So he would have gone through some other firm, and they would have not probably have said it was Madoff, although I would have expected to hear it through the grapevine, and I didn't. And I do wonder with the options, as long as you're raising this thing, I do wonder, was he actually trading options, or was he pretending to trade options, or was it some of both?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I should say, when you go to Bernie and say, Bernie, no one can find your footprints, his response was, well, these were negotiated like swap deals. They were off the exchange, which, of course, conveniently. And then if it was U.S.-based, he'd say, well, they were overdone internationally and vice versa. So now, it was completely fake on the options trading side. His legitimate business, which was a market maker in New York, was legitimate. Except they didn't really trade options through them, just equities.
Right. Okay. And I remember seeing them when I'd look on the Instinet machine and all this other stuff where you could see each of the dealers by their 4-letter code name. I'd see MADF all the time, the name for Madoff's market making firm. All right. So who did you talk to who was named Madoff, and how'd you get to him?
Okay. This is how it started. On my business talk show, I had a woman on who'd written a book that Andrew Madoff had cooperated with to an extent. Her name was Lori Sandell, and out of the blue she says, would you like to talk to Andrew Madoff as prep off the record for your interview with me? Which, of course, blew me away. And at the time, Andy's completely vilified. He's talking to nobody in the media. So I get him on the phone, and I start attacking him right away, and he disarmed me because he answered very honestly. And he said at the end, I'm going to listen to your show tomorrow, which is live. And, if I hear what I'm hearing now, I'll talk to you again. And that led to the second coincidence. His mother, Ruth, was moving from Florida to Greenwich, where I live in Connecticut here. And so I said, I'll take her to lunch. And we went to lunch, and she ordered a chef salad like she hadn't eaten in 3 weeks, and she kept her sunglasses on initially in the restaurant, though there was no one else there. But we hit it off really well until we were leaving, and I said, can I get a picture of us? And she stopped and said, "You're wired, aren't you?" Thought I'd set her up. But once she knew that I hadn't,
crazy.
She introduced me to Bernie, and that's and then we got together through the prison email system, and the rest is history.
Did you ever meet with Bernie more or less in person? Through some glass or through some bars or anything?
Yeah, no. If you can believe this, the warden of Butner Medium Security refused to allow me to come, calling me a security risk. So our relationship was 400 pages of communications, handwritten letters, details, sometimes as many as single-space 7 pages, and then emails.
Never phone?
We did not do phone either because he could only speak for 10 minutes.
Wow.
And so he would have had to keep getting in line. Now, he did call the house. This is Bernie's arrogance. He called the house once collect, because that's how you have to call from prison. I was not here. My wife rejected it, and he was completely outraged.
Oh, my gosh. Let me share a quote with you from the middle of the book. We'll share a quote with listeners because you're probably aware of what you wrote. Quote, what had taken Frank Casey about 4 minutes to sniff out would take the financial regulators 40 years to miss. And this is one of the things that really stuck out at me as a guy who, I had to deal with FINRA, and I had to deal with all this SRO stuff, and I had to get fingerprinted to be a member of multiple exchanges and all this. So who was Frank Casey, and what did he say about Bernie Madoff? And then let's talk about the SEC and those people. Okay.
Yes, Frank Casey was one of the 3 fundamental whistleblowers. The big one, the one that everybody's heard about, is Harry Markopolos. And in that quote that you mentioned, Frank is actually in Thierry Magnon, who was a feeder fund, the hedge funds that sent money to Bernie's, in his office trying to pitch business, trying to get some of his clients' funds. And Thierry was this French nobleman who had European royalty in his fund that he fed into Bernie, and tragically committed suicide 3 weeks after Bernie was arrested. But Frank was hearing him describe this secret manager. He wasn't allowed to reveal that Bernie was Madoff was that manager, and he's thinking right away, well, equity-based strategy can't possibly do what this guy is saying he's doing. But he didn't know who the guy's name was, and there he steps out of the office for a second, and he turns over a piece of paper on his desk. It says Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities, which kind of surprised him. So then he went back to Boston, and so he, in other words, in that 4 minutes, he said, I don't know what he's doing, but he can't be doing an equity strategy. He goes back to Boston where Harry...
Pause for a second. Pause for a second. I want to focus on... I just want you to elaborate, because I fully understand what you're saying, but I'm not sure listeners do. I want you to elaborate on what the dude meant when he thought to himself correctly that the results that Bernie Madoff was appearing to provide for investors could not possibly have been generated by a stock market strategy such as Bernie said he was engaging in.
Okay. Yeah, he called his strategy split strike conversion, which, by the way, I never found anybody in his trading, legitimate business, or victims understood exactly, but it's very simple conceptually, and we'll explain it. It should have mirrored the stock market index growth about 95%, which means, for folks, it just means it should have looked just like the stock market, except Bernie's strategy never had any down periods, not even basically more than for a couple of days at a time. Now, anybody, your grandmother who's never owned a stock knows that stocks don't go up every day. In fact, Harry figured out in those 2 hours the correlation or the linkage to the overall index was 5%, not 95%. So you can't have a strategy that's equity-based that goes up all the time, just say it simply.
Right. And by the way, folks, if you're just joining, we're talking with Jim Campbell. His book is called Madoff Talks, Uncovering the Untold Story Behind the Most Notorious Ponzi Scheme in History. And you can also check out the remarkable documentary on Netflix. All right, so let's keep going.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Pick up where you were.
Where was I exactly?
Well, what I want to get to, so Frank Casey figured this stuff out, right?
Yes.
And did he tell the SEC?
Here's what happened. First off, I can't say Frank figured it out. Frank figured that if it was a strategy that was working, it wasn't what Bernie was doing.
Right.
He was, which is illegal, right? To misrepresent your investment strategy for a money manager. And then Harry figured it out. Now, what they didn't know was, and this is what the SEC continuously investigated him for, exonerated, and then reinvestigated, whether he was doing front running. Front running, for folks that know, he's a market maker. Clients, which in this case is discount brokers like Schwab, make trades. So if someone's buying 500 shares of IBM and you know that's coming, it's a buy, that's going to slightly uptick IBM. So you jump right in front of it, buy some shares, and you're going to make money right away on a very small basis. They thought that's how Bernie was able to continually go up and up and up. Then they figured out, though, rather quickly that the options component could not have worked. It was the equivalent of selling 500 cars at a dealership that only had 100 cars in inventory. Now, they went to the SEC, and Harry had 30 red flags. The trouble is they didn't understand a word Harry was saying, literally, and B, because he was unable to dumb it down at that age, and B, they said he's a competitive money manager. He's just trying to stab a competitor.
Wow. All right, let me ask you a few quick questions. So give me some quick answers to these, and because I got so many things I want to ask you about. Is it true that his sons turned him in?
Yes. Not only did his sons turn him in quickly, they instantly went to turn him in to the FBI. And Andrew, both of them really, but Andrew I know because I know him, never said another word to his father ever again. Even when I told him he should get closure, said, nope, he's dead to me.
What was the circumstance under which the sons found out that Bernie was committing a fraud?
Okay. The book opens up with a dramatic scene in his office where he's appearing to have a nervous breakdown. The boys come in. This is December 10th. They take him home to his Upper East Side penthouse, and Bernie confesses, said that it's a Ponzi scheme, it's all fake, and the boys, basically Mark collapsed on the spot, and then they left. And Ruth, I asked her what was her first, feeling, and she said, my first comment was, what's a Ponzi scheme?
Wow. Do you believe her? Do you believe that she knew nothing?
I believe that fundamentally first of all, in Chapter 8, I do my own investigation because the Department of Justice, the FBI, the bankruptcy trustee, and the media all thought they had to know. And it was touch and go, particularly with the boys. I do not believe that they knew or were complicit. Ruth knew something was up the day before because Bernie told her to go withdraw $10 million, and she was in the firm the day before, seen by folks, and acting literally catatonic.
But she didn't know a year before or a decade before, you think?
She did not know a year before or a decade before, and in fact, all of her family was wiped out, and she lived with them afterwards.
Bernie Madoff was Jewish. He seemed to target Jews to be the victims of his fraud. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, this was an affinity fraud. 85% of the victims and the charities were Jewish, and one of the things that I say out of the book, if your dentist tells you to buy something, run out of his office. This Jewish community started with his friends and family and then spread like wildfire, and people didn't know how he was doing it. And some knew that it wasn't kosher, and they would say, like, well, he's kind of our crook. We're going to look the other way. And then tons were absolutely innocent victims and just did it because he was called the Jewish T-bill, as trustworthy as the U.S. Treasury bonds.
Wow. Okay, so I was going to ask you, was Bernie ever legit? But I'm going to skip ahead a little bit in the sense that you talk in the book about how the market-making side of the firm was legit, but that's not where the big money was. So my question, I'll let you elaborate that on a second, but let me ask you another thing at the same time. So was the investment management, quote unquote, side of the firm, was that ever legit, or was that a Ponzi scheme from day one? Okay,
those are two great questions. So first off, the market making business was not only was it highly legitimate, broke the monopoly of the New York Stock Exchange. Basically, he architected the NASDAQ, but it in of itself, separate from the Ponzi scheme, at peak was worth $3 billion. Now, the second part of your question, this is the unfathomable part of Bernie's brain. You would assume if you're running a legitimate business and this Ponzi scheme suddenly appeared, that what must have happened? He made a bad trade.
Right.
He lost some money, and like a gambler, made the classic gambler's mistake and doubled down. In this case, I'll run a Ponzi scheme a little bit, and then nobody will ever know.
Yeah, the stuff I bought will come back up. I'll sell it. I'll put the money back in the other accounts, and no one will ever know.
Right, and then, you know, it never works with a gambler. He told me a story like this that he had not told publicly. But as I went further and further, and as, you know, it was uncovered, this is the part that's amazing. He ran at the same time on the 19th floor, beautiful, high-tech, Hollywood-looking set, market maker, 100% legitimate business. At the same time, on the 17th floor, behind lock and key with unsophisticated high school graduates, and looked totally different, a criminal Ponzi scheme from day one.
Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. All right, last thing for you.
Sure.
When Bernie Madoff, so how close did Bernie Madoff in his communications with you, how close did he get to expressing remorse? And did you ever believe that he was actually remorseful, or was he remorseful in a way that only a malignant narcissist can be, that isn't really remorse for what he's done, but fake remorse for that it didn't work out right or something?
Well, by the way, these are brilliant, great questions. Let me give you what he said to me literally, which will kind of answer your question. Bernie, tell me about your remorse. Jim, my lawyers tell me I have to have remorse. And then within a minute, he would be back. I'm a victim of these guys. They were greedy. I always had to deliver. If they lied about their net worth to get into the fund, that's their fault. If they didn't know they were undiversified, or they knew they were undiversified, that's their fault, their mistake. And literally, he had a hard time expressing. Now, he was upset by his son's suicide, obviously, and he ran the firm like a family in many ways. The legitimate side, he paid for honeymoons and sudden medical expenses, but overall, he lacked remorse. And remember when he says that he was the victim? He's the one that set up the bribes where he passed his fees back to the hedge fund managers whose only job was due diligence. In response, they were not allowed to do due diligence. So he set up this thing that he said he was the victim of.
Unbelievable. I mean, literally unbelievable. Last quick question. How much money did his investors end up losing?
They thought they had $65 billion on their, month-end statements. Their original investments, some of which went back 40 years, were $19 billion. So the trustee got back $14 billion, which is amazing, although the way he did it, in my mind, is highly unscrupulous, taking it from some victims and giving it to others. And so they got back 70% the net losers, people who left money in, on the original investment basis, but it's only 22% on what they thought they had. And about $10 billion of that were from just the big four investors of Bernie, and he helped get a chunk of that back. The trustee that I just told you, he got $2 billion of fees for this.
Oh, man. Jim Campbell's book is called Madoff Talks, Uncovering the Untold Story Behind the Most Notorious Ponzi Scheme in History. The Netflix documentary is called Madoff, the Monster of Wall Street. Jim, I'll tell you what, give me a very quick answer to one other thing, because I'm kind of late here, but I really want to ask you this. Is Sam Bankman-Fried mostly like Bernie Madoff or mostly not like Bernie Madoff?
I would say there's a lot of similarities in that they both built their reputations off trust. He bought it with politicians, and he's got some ex-CFTC guys and celebrities and stuff like that. And they both, in my mind, I know Bernie showed a lack of remorse. SBF is basically the dog ate my homework, which is highly unlikely if you believe all the allegations.
Jim Campbell, thanks for your time. Thanks for the fascinating book, and congratulations on your success.
Great. Thanks for the great questions, Ross. I appreciate being on.